For the last 5 weeks or so, I have had the opportunity to shoot with the brand new Hasselblad X2D II, which I am really excited to finally share with you in this video today. I've been using the X2D for the last 3 years, and as much as I've loved that camera, this new version 2 is one of the best upgrades we've seen on any model from Hasselblad. This is a very impressive update. So first off, we finally get continuous autofocus shooting with tracking support as well as object recognition. Autofocus is much faster, and continuous tracking allows for much better focusing, obviously, with moving subjects. The X2D also supports HDR imaging now, which gives you an incredibly natural-looking images with more dynamic range for screen delivery. The new rear screen is capable of up to 1400 nits of brightness, so you now have the latitude to preview exposure and review images in HDR output. The X2D II also features improved 5-axis in-body image stabilization, which gives you up to 10 stops of performance for realization of handheld long exposures. We also got a major update to Phocus Mobile 2, which in addition now to deep learning noise reduction, the app will now support HDR image editing and some new features for controlling the camera. Welcome back, everyone. I am super excited to be doing this video today. I have been a big fan of the X2D for the last 3 years, and today Hasselblad have announced the brand new X2D II, which is a really exciting update. Now, there is a lot going on here. We have some mobile updates as well, but Hasselblad also released a brand new lens that I'm very excited about. This is the 35-100 E-series lens. Now, just to keep this from getting to be too much, I'm actually going to do 2 separate videos. So if you're interested in the lens, I will link up here. There's another video on that, or I'll link it up at the end of this video. A lot to talk about today, so let's dive right in. Okay, so let's talk about what is physically new about the X2D II. So the first thing you're going to notice is that compared to the X2D, we have a slightly different shade of gray, and the other cool thing I like is that all of the text on the body is blacked out. I think that's a really cool move. You rarely see a camera manufacturer do this. I think it's an indicator of the confidence in the brand that Hasselblad have. They're confident there is no other camera that looks like this. The camera also features a new leatherette pattern, which is different than the X2D. And we've also got some function control updates. The most obvious that you're going to notice on the back of the camera, we've got a joystick that's operable in 5 directions, including a push function. Beneath that, we also have a rear custom function button. Now, it's also worth noting on the X2D that the rear dial also had a push function, so that acts as a custom function button. And what's cool is on the X2D II, the front dial now is also a push function. So the rear screen is also brand new. So this one features a standard D65 for color calibration, so it brings it close to the iPhone in terms of screen color temperature. And when we talk about HDR, it also gives you up to 1400 nit brightness. This is a really big upgrade, and it's really nice on a camera like this to have. Another thing that's worth noting is the covers on the side of the camera do feature a magnetic design, which gives them a really solid and premium feel. Under the bottom cover, you're going to have access to the CF Express card slot, and on the top cover, you're going to notice that we've got a USB-C port for powering the camera or connecting to a computer, and we now have the little 1/8 inch jack. So for those of you who have the Hasselblad remote release, you can now use it with the X2D II. Another thing that's very subtle but really nice is in the menus, we still have the icon touch-based menu system in here, but what's really cool is Hasselblad has now added a very slight haptic feedback on here, which is really kind of cool because it gives you just a little bit of response when you're turning on and off certain settings. You can toggle this on and off in the settings and in the touch menu. And this camera is slightly lighter than the X2D, just a little bit. It's by about 55 grams, but it makes a difference. All right, so let's talk a little bit about autofocus improvements on the X2D II. This is the upgrade that I am by far the most excited about because it is a game changer for using a Hasselblad. So if you've ever shot on a Hasselblad before, you know that all the XCD cameras, so starting with the X1D back in 2016 up until now, have been not only AFS only, but they are also single point. Now with the X2D, we did get the addition of human face detection, but again, it was AFS only. So that is all changed now with this camera. I am pleased to say that we now have not only object recognition, but an incredibly good continuous speed autofocus. The tracking on here is exceptional. It's fast, it's accurate. They have done an excellent job on this. In fact, this reason alone, I'm kind of surprised we didn't jump just to the X3D. There's an enormous amount of processing power that's been added to the X2D II, and it really is good. So what Hasselblad are doing technically to achieve this is they're using a combination of not only phase detection autofocus as well as contrast detection, but we've also added lidar into the functionality as well. Now these technologies all work together under the hood. You don't have to select between them, and the result is just seamless. It is really amazing, and it's really exciting to see this level of performance in a medium format camera. A couple things I want to point out. By default, the way the camera's set up, if you use the new custom function button on the back of the camera that's below the 5D joystick, it's going to bring up two little submenus. I think these are very well designed. There's one on the right and there's one on the left. And the way you can do these is you can toggle through them using the joystick, or you can set them up as touch. But we've got single point autofocus. We now have tracking autofocus. And then we have a custom area autofocus, or you can just go full. Over on the right-hand side, we've got our object detection selection. You can have humans, you can have animals, cars, or you can turn this off completely. One thing that's really nice about this is you don't have to turn it off completely if you want to have tracking and IAF on at the same time. Very simple to use, very simple to set up. Another thing that's handy to do is that if you want to switch between, let's say, human and animal or cars really quickly, and you want to just round robin through the options, by default, the camera's set up with that front dial, which is now pushable. So when I push that in, I can switch between people, animals, cars, and I can actually turn it off and then turn it back on to people. It'll just round robin through the selections. This is really nice. It works really fast, and it works seamlessly when you're using this camera. I should also note that if you're already into the system and you own some of the Hasselblad lenses, the lenses will require firmware updates to work with the continuous autofocus. So this goes for all of the P, V, and E series lenses. It's pretty easy. You just update the firmware and they work great. I also want to talk about some imaging upgrades in this camera, which is something I really didn't expect because I've always thought of Hasselblad as being the top of the line in terms of just basic image quality. It really is good. So one of the differences that you're going to notice with the X2D II, the base ISO on the X2D was 64. Base ISO on here is 50. So we are getting 15.3 stops of dynamic range. And of course, if you're shooting in RAW, you do have the option for 16-bit files. So for me, this really is the best of the best, top of the line in terms of image quality that you're going to find on any system. Another thing that's really interesting, Hasselblad is stating that this is an industry first, but this is an end-to-end true HDR camera. All right, now let's talk about this for a second, because when a lot of people think of HDR, they think of something that was very popular about 20 years ago, where photographers would take a bunch of different exposures, blend them together using tone mapping, and get really oversaturated, disgusting colors and plastic skin tones. That is not what we're talking about with HDR in this camera. What we're talking about is more what we've seen with things like the iPhone in recent years, where you're capable of capturing enough dynamic range within there that is going to be able to be displayed on monitors that support that dynamic range. So let's take a step back though, and I want to define what we're talking about as high dynamic range in the context of the X2D and digital imaging. So light is measured in what we call stops. And so if you look at an image, the darkest point in the image we perceive as black, the brightest point we perceive as white, and stops define what the dynamic range is between those 2 points. Now, if you consider something like the human eye, which is capable of probably over 20 stops of light, we really only perceive 10 to 14 because our eyes change depending on the lighting situation. If you go from a bright setting into a dark room, your eye shifts. When we talk about stops in terms of photography, we're talking about a camera that has an image sensor that can capture 15.3 stops of light. Okay, let's consider output for a second. For those of you who print on an inkjet printer, you need to realize that paper only has a dynamic range of about 8 stops. So where are we going from 15.3 down to 8? Well, you have latitude in your exposure where we can rescue shadow detail or even rescue highlight detail to get the image balanced as the way we want to perceive it or interpret it in the end. So that's paper. If we look at screens, though, screens have a dynamic range to them also. And in recent years, screens have increased in the amount of brightness that they're capable of. So for instance, the iPhone is capable of 2,000 nits of brightness. We measured that in nits. So from being completely dark as a screen to going to 2,000 nits, you get an enormous increase in latitude of dynamic range that's coming off the monitor. So we now have color spaces that have grown and gotten more mature, and we have the ability to actually view dynamic range that we couldn't before. Now, another thing to consider is file format. If you're working with JPEG files, JPEGs are inherently 8-bit, which gives you about 16.8 million colors. But if you're working working with HEIC files, or high efficiency file format, which Hasselblad supports, you're going to be working in 10-bit files, which is going to give you over 1 billion colors. There's a lot more color information that can be displayed from these files. So in addition to increased dynamic range, we're also got a lot more colors that we're working with. So Hasselblad are stating now that the X2D II is an end-to-end solution for HDR imaging, which is true. You can use it in that manner. The brand new screen delivers up to 1400 nits of brightness, so we can now view the images that we're capturing in HDR. You can also edit these using Phocus Mobile, or you can actually use Focus on the desktop. There are other applications as well, and you can deliver files in the HDR format. Now, the other thing that's key about this is the HEIC file format actually contains the standard dynamic range image. So if you're viewing it on a monitor or an older phone that doesn't support high dynamic range, you can still view the image and it looks good. But it also contains what we call a gain map, and the gain map is simply data that tells the screen how to render the file to get those extra stops of light in. And they end up with images, especially when you combine this with Hasselblad's natural color solution. This is actually expanding your highlight latitude for more nuanced natural tones. The color looks amazing. The images are really brilliant looking when you see them displayed correctly, and it's pretty awesome. And of course, now we have support not only on phones, but also social media platforms, so things like Instagram. Now, I do want to note that it's very difficult to show you what these look like in this video because this video is not recorded in HDR, so I'm having to kind of simulate this by showing you screen examples that were shot with a camera. But I will be posting these on Instagram today, so if you want to see what these results actually look like, my handle is @TedForbes, or I'll put a link in the show description below, but you are welcome to go over there and check them out for yourself. Now, admittedly, I do have to say that HDR is not a technology that I've been very involved with other than just shooting casually on my iPhone. But now that I've been testing the Hasselblad, something I've really fallen in love with, and I think it provides a really interesting option for screen delivery, and it gives you something that you couldn't do before. Which brings us to some of the new improvements in the Phocus Mobile 2 app. So Phocus Mobile has come a long way, and I did a video a few months ago when Hasselblad released the technology for the Hasselblad Natural Noise Reduction System. So HNNR is what they call it, is a way of using deep learning algorithms to actually clean up noise in higher ISO images, and it is ridiculously impressive how well it works. At this point, it's available only on mobile, and it's really only limited to iOS devices, but it is really good. The reason for that limitation is that it relies on the neural engine processing, so it does require a lot of processing power to do it. And the newer the phone or the iPad that you have, the better performance you're going to get out of it. But really, it is good enough, and you can actually return out a raw file and bring it over to the desktop that's cleaned up. And it makes a camera, especially something like the 907X, something that's very usable when you have to use those higher ISO settings because you don't have in-body image stabilization. Of course, all that is available with the X2D II as well. Now, we're talking about HDR. Well, the app now supports HDR editing, which is really cool because you can see how far you can push the files and what you can actually do with these. There are some other cool additions in Phocus Mobile 2. Now, we can actually do things like remote turn on the camera. So let's say it's in your bag across the room. As long as the phone can detect that it's there, you can actually turn it on and transfer images. You can also turn off the camera from the app. And another thing that's very useful is the ability to do firmware updates in the lenses and bodies when they come out. Instead of having to download files on your computer, put them on cards, and do that whole dance, you can just do it remote with Phocus Mobile 2. Now, another upgrade in the X2D II is with the 5-axis image stabilization. So in the X2D, we had really good image stabilization. I want to make this point. It was a 7-stop image stabilization, and it was really great if you needed to use slower shutter speeds with various things. In fact, I would have been happy just to continue using the 7-stop, but now we have a 10-stop, which allows you to do some really wild stuff. So you are at a point now where your biggest problem is going to be the subject actually moving or things moving in frame. So you can do things now like you can capture water moving, or you can capture people moving or traffic without using a tripod. And if you're using wider angle lenses, and depending on how steady your own hands are in conjunction with the system, you can actually handhold up to 1 second, which is very impressive. Okay, so I've been shooting on the X2D II for about 4 or 5 weeks now, and I want to talk about some of my first impressions with this camera. So many of you who watch my channel know that I am a big fan of the X2D, and that has been one of my main cameras for the last 3 years. I absolutely love the X2D. The image quality that I get on this is just unparalleled. It is outstanding. However, with the X2D, there are some limitations, mainly when we get into autofocus. And I think some of the problem is that when you're single point only, And when it's AFS only, then you have to get creative in the skill of using the camera. And I was able to work around it, and I shoot some things with motion. So I've done shots with ballet with this, for instance. You've seen a lot of those in my previous videos. I've done a lot of traveling with this. I used it in a ballet workshop this last year, and I know how to use this camera, and I know how to get the results that I'm trying to get. And they do take some user experience and some learning on my end. But with the X2D II now, the autofocus on here is so good, and it opens up an enormous amount of possibilities of what you can actually do with this camera. I'm glad that I kind of learned to work around some of those, but now that they're here, it gives me a whole new set of tools that I can now use in the work that I do. I'm really excited about that. I'm really impressed with the speed of the autofocus. The accuracy is excellent. IAF is just perfect. When you nail something, I mean, you zoom right in and everything is perfectly in focus exactly where you want it to be. The tracking is surprisingly really good on here. And normally when you think of medium format cameras, you think that, well, the sensor's much bigger. There's a lot more scan time. There's a lot more work and processing that goes into it. We're talking about 100 megapixels here. And so it really is kind of difficult on the processor to do. But we've had some upgrades in this camera that make it just so impressive. And now that you can track subjects with this and you can shoot things that move, it really does open up a lot of doors to what is possible on this camera. I also love the improvements with the in-body image stabilization. We've got 10 stop now. Whether or not you need to hand hold up to 1 second is kind of ridiculous when you think about it, but the fact that it's there and it removes those limitations is really exciting to me. A couple things that we've had before on cameras, they're not new and they're not upgraded, but we still have them. First of all, 16-bit imaging quality. It's incredible. The slower ISO of 50 probably enables a slightly larger dynamic range on here. And then also, and this is a super technical detail, but I love the fact that these cameras have built-in storage. The X2D had this as well. There's 1 terabyte of SSD storage in here. So you can use that by itself. If you forget the card somehow or something, you can use it as backup. It really makes a big difference in this camera. And it's kind of cool because you're not dealing with 2 card slots. You just have internal storage. In fact, I think at this point in 2025, when you're talking about the size of SSD storage and the cost, I'm really surprised that more cameras don't offer this. There's only a handful on the market and they're usually on the high end. Anyway, it's a great addition to this camera. Another thing that I'm excited to see is that even though the menu system had to get a little more complex this time around because of the autofocus options, they still kept a very clean and very usable user design. And this is something that's always impressed me about Hasselblad. The X1D had it, where you have this icon-based system where you go in and the settings are such that you're not afraid to dive into the menus and you know where things are and things are kept simple. Now, we did add a layer onto that where you have object recognition as well as autofocus options for various point sizes, and they kept everything very simple. And so something that I always feared is that these cameras got more complex, that the menus would also get more complex, and that didn't happen. Hasselblad have kept it, and it's really beautiful and very cool. And another thing about the X2D II, which is extremely impressive, is when you consider all the upgrades that we're getting now, we live in a world where all the camera manufacturers seem to be upping their prices on everything. Well, Hasselblad just came out with an incredible camera that is $800 less expensive than its predecessor. The custom function button additions on this camera are very welcome as well. So we've got now the joystick and we have the button on the back as well as the previous button on the front, and we can now push in on the front dial. When you combine this with, let's say, one of the V-series lenses where you have the custom function control ring, we now have 8 custom function buttons on the camera. This is super nice because if you're like me and you have a lot of settings that you'd like to change on the fly, and so like one of the basic ones that I do is I will change the crop modes a lot. I like to go from X-band to full frame to actually doing a 35mm equivalent. You can shoot in a square format and you can round robin through those. Another one that I will do is I will change within automatic exposure, I will change the minimum shutter speed depending on what I'm doing. If I'm shooting something with motion and I need a faster shutter speed, then I need to be able to toggle that, and so I set up a button for that. It's things like autofocus. This is really cool about this camera, and it's something that makes it very usable. Anyway, there is a lot that I'm very impressed with, and I will follow with some future videos as well. I have another separate video that I've done on the new lens that came out today, which is the new E-series lens, which is the zoom lens. It's a 35-100. You should check that out next because it is very impressive when combined with the X2D II. Would love to know what you guys think, so drop me a comment, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Until then, later.